Carla Martinez was used to coming home at 6:30 the evening. That was when her shift ended at the Polish & Co. salon, a small but bright business just 2 blocks from her condo, where she had worked as a nail technician for 5 years. 5 years of the scent of nail polish and the sound of a nail file. 5 years of holding strangers' hands and listening to personal stories that clients preferred to share with her rather than with their therapists. Carla knew how to listen and smile even when she didn't feel like it, and above all, she knew how to hide her emotions, even as her own identity was slowly crumbling inside. Outwardly, she was one of those women you wouldn't notice at first glance, not because she wasn't beautiful, but because she didn't draw attention to herself. Average height, dark, wavy, shoulder-length hair that she usually kept tied back to save time. Her nails were always clean and perfectly manicured, a professional habit. She had a direct gaze, with no hint of coyness or excessive warmth. Her co-workers at the salon would say that Carla was the type you could always count on. Her clients would say she wasn't one to gossip about others' secrets, but she always knew when to offer support. Her husband of the past 2 years, however, had nothing to say about her. He simply ignored her. Jeremy Martinez was a man blessed by nature with a handsome physical appearance but denied a good character. He was tall, with a strong jawline. He was excellent at making a great first impression. A charming smile, confident speech, and an expensive watch he'd bought on an installment plan with a credit card. But a first impression was all he could offer. What followed was a void, covered up by a short temper. He changed jobs every year and a half, always claiming the company didn't appreciate him, and he was often involved in questionable business ventures with his buddies, and each time, it was Carla who pulled their family out of debt, quietly, without recrimination. She convinced herself that this was what marriage was about, to endure and to hold on. She had only seen Valerie Clark twice. The first time was an accident, 8 months ago, when she picked Jeremy up from a corporate Christmas party. She noticed an unfamiliar woman holding onto her husband's elbow for far too long while saying goodbye. The second time was in a photo on Jeremy's phone, which accidentally opened when he asked her to answer a call for him. She said nothing that time. She just placed the phone face down on the table and went out onto the balcony. She stood there for a moment, then came back inside and prepared dinner. She was just buying time because she was afraid. Not of Jeremy. She hadn't been afraid of her husband for a long time. She was afraid of destroying what their 9-year-old daughter, Maya, called our family. The child loved her father, despite everything, and Carla couldn't bring herself to erase that with a single decision. One evening in September, she walked home faster than usual. Her back ached. Maya should have been home from school by 3 p.m., and Carla had even called her at 4 to make sure everything was okay. Her daughter's response had been a little strange. Short sentences, almost no emotion, but Carla had brushed it off, thinking she was just tired from a math exam. She never imagined that no peace was to be found for her that day. The door to their condo was unlocked. Not just unlocked, the deadbolt had been turned from the outside with a key. Carla stopped for a second. She felt in her jacket pocket for her own keys. They were there. That meant someone had used the spare key. Jeremy, or someone he had given it to. She stepped inside. For the first few seconds, her mind couldn't process what she saw in the living room. It was as if her brain refused to accept the scene as real. In the middle of the hallway, her large suitcase was open. The same suitcase they had used on their vacation to the Florida Keys 3 years ago, their last vacation as a family, back when she still hoped things could be fixed. The suitcase was open, and a woman was bent over it. Not Jeremy, but a woman. Valerie Clark was the type of person who knew how to occupy someone else's space as if it had always been hers. 25 years old, tall, with confidence in every movement, and long, flowing, black hair. She was unhurriedly folding Carla's clothes into the suitcase, a stack of blouses from the top shelf of the closet, the bathroom organizer that Carla didn't even know how it got there. She was doing it calmly, almost methodically, as if she were simply organizing her own wardrobe for a change of season. Valerie said, without even turning around, that Carla was finally here. That was good. She told Carla to get the rest of the things she hadn't packed yet. Carla didn't move from where she stood. Something inside her, the same instinct that separates survivors from victims, commanded her to just stand, watch, and not scream. Finally, Valerie turned. On her face was a particular expression of arrogance seen only in people who are certain they will face no consequences. She told her not to worry too much. They would leave enough money for the first month's rent. She and Maya could find a small apartment for a while, she said. And at the corner of her lips, a smirk appeared. She said that they wouldn't be abandoned. They would take care of it, she said they. Carla slowly shifted her gaze to the end of the hallway. Jeremy peeked out from the bedroom for a second, no more than that. Their eyes met, and he immediately retreated, as if he hadn't seen his wife, but a stranger to whom he had nothing to say. He didn't even try to speak. He just hid, and in that silence, in his cowardly retreat, was everything she needed to know about the man she had been with for 10 years. Carla was 33, and the last 10 years of her life had been spent with this man. She remembered how they met at a friend's birthday party, how he had been funny and a bit hesitant back then, and she, like a fool, had thought his hesitation was a sign of sincerity. All those years, she had pulled him out of debt, supported him while working 2 jobs, given birth to his child, and forgiven his silence and coldness. And now he was standing behind a door, avoiding her gaze while a strange woman packed her life into a suitcase. "Mom," a quiet voice said, almost inaudible. Carla lowered her eyes. Maya was standing in the doorway of her room, small in her school uniform, which she hadn't yet changed out of. 9 years old, with coffee-colored eyes, just like Carla's. And now there was something in those eyes that made a lump form in a mother's throat. Not fear, seriousness. The kind of not-a-child seriousness that appears when they understand that the adults have broken down and they need to be strong. Maya was that kind of child, the type who noticed things not because they were explained to her, but because from birth, she had observed the world with a quiet attention that adults often mistook for shyness. She was the first to sense when her parents started talking to each other cautiously, as if walking on thin ice. She was the first to notice that her father was going out more often at night, and she was the first to understand, now, that something was happening that her mother needed to know about, right away. Maya drew close, pulled on her mother's sleeve, and stood on her toes. "Mom," she whispered, directly into her ear that they needed to leave. That she had something to tell her. Valerie glanced at them for a moment, then demonstratively returned to packing the suitcase. Carla took her daughter's hand and led her to the kitchen. She closed the door, not slamming it, but closing it gently until the lock clicked. She sat on a chair in front of Maya to meet her eyes. She told her to speak, to tell her everything she saw. Maya began in a rush. "When you called at 4, I was in the hallway. That auntie came early with Dad. They thought I was asleep. I lay down when I got home from school. I had a headache, but I heard them talking. Then I got up to get some water, and I saw through the crack in the door." Carla asked her what she saw. Maya said she took a small plastic baggie from her purse. It was clear. It had something white inside, and she put it, like this. Maya demonstrated with her hands, underneath your clothes in the suitcase. And she told Dad to let them find that you would disappear on your own. No lawsuits, no child support. The silence in the kitchen was so deafening that Carla could hear the ticking of the clock on top of the refrigerator. A small baggie with white powder under the clothes in the suitcase, and a sentence whose meaning left no room for doubt. This wasn't just an attempt to kick her out of the house. It was a trap being set, something you couldn't explain away, couldn't escape from, and couldn't easily prove your innocence of. With that kind of evidence, she wouldn't just lose the condo. She could also lose her child and her freedom. Carla sat up straight. Inside, she was surprised at herself. There was no panic. There was a cold, sharp evenness, like ice under your feet that you can't break with a sudden move, or you'll sink. She told Maya quietly that she was brilliant, that she had done everything right. "Now," she instructed, "listen to me. You will stay here in the kitchen. Do not open the door. Is that clear?" Maya nodded. Carla took out her cell phone. The first call was to Renee Reyes, her friend who lived a 10-minute walk away. They had been friends since high school, and if there was one person you could tell you needed them right now without any questions, it was her. Renee was a woman with a special temperament, one of those people who don't ask a lot of questions in a crisis but just grab their purse and leave the house. She was an accountant, practical to the bone, and possessed a rare quality. In the midst of others' chaos, she could maintain absolute calm. "Renee, I need you," Carla said, "right now. You know the address." Renee asked what happened. "I'm on my way," Carla said. "I'll explain later. This is important. Life and death. Please." Second step. Carla opened the camera on her phone and started a video recording. She slowly walked out of the kitchen into the hallway. Valerie was still standing by the suitcase. Carla moved so that the video captured the suitcase, the strange woman over it, and the things she was quietly taking. She didn't speak, didn't approach the suitcase. She didn't touch it with a single finger. That was crucial. Her life depended on it. Valerie noticed the phone. She asked why Carla was taking a video, annoyance in her voice. "Yes," Carla answered calmly. "Put that camera away," Valerie demanded. "You can't do that without my permission." "In my own condo," Carla replied. "I can." She tilted her head slightly. "This unit is in my name. You can check at the Registry of Deeds." It was true. 5 years ago, when they took out a mortgage, the loan was in Carla's name. Jeremy's credit history was poor. She had been grateful for it back then. Now it seemed he had forgotten. Valerie fell silent, but her gaze sharpened. Third step. Carla returned to the kitchen, closed the door, and dialed 911. "Good evening," she said. "I'd like to report a domestic dispute and the possible planting of illegal drugs at this address." She gave the address clearly, without hesitation. "There is another person inside my condo putting my personal belongings into a suitcase. My daughter witnessed this person plant a plastic sachet containing a suspected illegal substance in the suitcase. I have not touched the suitcase. I am requesting a police response to conduct an inspection according to proper procedure." The dispatcher asked for details and requested that she stay put and not touch anything. "I understand," Carla said. "That's what I'm doing." She hung up. Maya was watching her, sitting on a kitchen chair, hugging her school bag like a shield. "Is everything going to be okay?" her daughter asked. "Yes," Carla answered. "We're doing the right thing." From the hallway, they could hear Valerie's footsteps pacing back and forth, obviously nervous. Then Jeremy's voice, low. "Valerie, is everything okay in there?" And her reply, short and angry. "It's fine. Just let them try something." Carla stood by the window, looking out at the street below. A city bus pulled away from the curb. On the opposite corner, a dog was pulling on its owner's leash. Life outside continued its ordinary flow, unaware that here, on the 4th floor, a decision was being made right now about whether she would remain a free woman or not. She figured Valerie had been certain of the plan. Carla would come in, see the suitcase, frantically sort through her things, find the sachet or not, and then someone would find it at the right time. Or Carla would understand everything, get scared, and leave quietly. No case, no claim to the condo, no child support, or she would scream, make threats, and give them a reason to call the police on her. Hysterical, a nervous breakdown, not in her right mind. Carla chose none of these options. 20 minutes later, the intercom buzzed. It was Renee. 30 minutes after that, a police car pulled up in front of the building. Carla took Maya's hand, walked out of the kitchen, and opened the front door. Valerie looked up from the suitcase. For the first time that evening, an expression that was not confidence or arrogance appeared on her face. It was fear, and Carla noticed it. She would burn it into her mind because that moment, the moment the opponent understands they have miscalculated, was a sufficient reward for all the cold self-control she had exerted over the past half hour. A uniformed police officer appeared at the door. Behind him was another, and beside them, a breathless Renee holding her phone, having arrived at the exact same time as the police. She entered with them, stood slightly behind, and silently swept her sharp gaze around the room, the gaze of someone who immediately understood that something very serious was happening here. "Who is the owner of this unit?" the first officer asked. "I am," Carla answered calmly. "I am ready to explain everything." Sergeant Rick Ramos was one of those cops who couldn't be swayed by tears, shouts, or pleading. 40 years old, with a large frame and a short haircut peppered with gray, his face was closed off, professionally neutral. One of those people who show neither sympathy nor judgment until it's warranted. He entered the condo first, his eyes quickly scanning the living room. The open suitcase full of belongings, a woman beside it, another woman by the kitchen door with a child behind her, and a man standing awkwardly at the end of the hallway. It was immediately clear to him. He had seen this before. Not exactly this, but similar in structure. A family dispute that had escalated into a property battle. But from the beginning, the complainant on the phone had mentioned illegal drugs, and that changed everything. Ramos stopped in the middle of the living room and said, not loudly, that he needed everyone to stay where they were. No one was to touch anything. The second officer, a younger man in his mid-20s with a notepad, stood by the door. René Reyes, who had entered with them, had only a moment to give Carla a quick glance, a glance that contained everything. "I'm here. I'm on your side. Speak." She then retreated to the side of the wall and fell silent, understanding that her time to speak had not yet come. Ramos turned to Carla. "You're the one who called?" He addressed her as ma'am. "I own this condo," she began, speaking clearly, without rushing, without excess emotion. "The mortgage is in my name. Today, when I came home from work around 6:30, I found another person inside my condo." Carla pointed to Valerie. "This woman, Valerie Clark, my husband's mistress, was packing my personal belongings into a suitcase without my permission. Before you arrived, I did not touch or even approach the suitcase. My daughter, Maya, witnessed Miss Clark place a plastic sachet containing a suspected illegal substance into the suitcase." Ramos listened without interrupting, then nodded slightly. "Who else is in the unit?" "My husband, Jeremy Martinez." Carla didn't turn around. She just said his name. "He's in the bedroom." He asked that everyone present come into the living room. Valerie walked first, calm, her back straight, as if to show she had nothing to hide. But Carla noticed her fingers were slightly clenched, and for a split second, she didn't immediately remove her hands from the suitcase. She looked at it as if mentally gauging if she still had time to do anything. There was no more time. Ramos noticed it too. "Don't touch it," he repeated calmly, and Valerie removed her hands. The living room felt crowded. Jeremy sat on the edge of the sofa, hunched over like a man caught in a shameful act who hadn't yet decided whether to confess or deny. Valerie stood by the window. Carla remained by the entrance, Maya beside her, her shoulder leaning silently against her mother's side. Renee took a chair against the wall, quiet, inconspicuous, like someone who had come not to speak but to watch. The young officer opened his notebook. "We'll start by identifying everyone." Ramos looked at Valerie. "Your details?" Valerie Clark, 35 years old. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "Your residential address?" Valerie gave an address in a different part of Chicago. "So you are not registered here, and you do not live here," Ramos stated. A short but noticeable pause. "I'm here with Jeremy," he invited me. "Do you have a key to the unit?" Jeremy opened the door. "So you do not have a key," Ramos noted, not as a question but as a statement of fact, and turned to Jeremy. "Do you confirm that you gave this woman permission to enter the condo?" Jeremy raised his head. He looked like a man who had spent the last hour hoping for a different kind of conversation, a conversation without police. Yes, she's with me. The condo is in her name, my wife's. But I have rights." "That's a separate issue," Ramos cut in, not rudely, but firmly. "For now, we are recording this. The unit is in the name of Carla Martinez. Miss Clark is not registered here, has no key, and entered with Mr. Martinez." He turned back to Carla. You reported a suspicion of planted illegal drugs over the phone. Please explain in more detail. When I came home, my daughter told me she saw Miss Clark take a transparent plastic sachet with a white powder from her bag and place it under the clothes in the suitcase. At the same time, she told my husband the following. Carla paused for a moment. Let them find that. She'll disappear on her own. No lawsuits, no child support. After my daughter told me this, I immediately called you, informed a witness. She pointed to Renee and took a video. I have not touched the suitcase at all. Do you have a video? Yes. Carla handed him her phone. It shows I entered the living room. The suitcase was open. Miss Clark was standing beside it. I did not touch the lid or its contents. Ramos watched the video silently, handed the phone to the younger officer, who began noting it in the logbook. We need witnesses from the building, Ramos said to his partner. Go outside. Get a couple of neighbors. 2. While his partner was gone, a silence fell over the living room. Valerie stood by the window with a blank face, but Carla saw her occasionally glance at Jeremy. Short, insistent glances that meant, hold your ground, stay quiet. Jeremy stared at the floor. Renee took out her phone and quietly recorded her own video, not obviously, just capturing the general situation in the room. Carla noticed and gave her friend a slight nod. A few minutes later, the young officer returned with 2 neighbors, an older man and a younger woman who, by the looks of it, had just gotten home from work. Their role as witnesses was explained, and they were asked to sign the inventory. They both agreed, with a mixture of curiosity but without many questions. We will now begin the inspection of the suitcase, Ramos announced. The suitcase belongs to the complainant? Yes, Carla said. The items inside are yours? Yes. I did not pack them. Miss Clark packed them without my presence. Ramos put on gloves. The younger officer stood by with the notepad. The witnesses from the building flanked them at a respectful distance. The suitcase was opened. On top were clothes, folded neatly, almost carefully. Exactly how you fold clothes when you want everything to look natural, systematic, unhurried. Ramos began to go through the contents, layer by layer. The living room was so quiet you could only hear the rustle of fabric and the faint creak of the floorboards under the witnesses' feet. The sachet was found on the 3rd layer, under a stack of blouses, tucked into the side of the suitcase, transparent, sealed, the size of a palm. Inside was a white powder. Log this, Ramos said to his partner. He picked up the sachet with tweezers, placed it in a special evidence envelope, sealed it, and wrote down the date, time, and address. The witnesses from the building signed. The young officer wrote everything in the report. Please also note in the report, Carla said calmly, that the complainant did not touch the suitcase before the responding police arrived, and that this is confirmed by the video and the witness's statement. Ramos looked at her, not with surprise, but with the professional respect that emerges for people who know what they need. It will be noted, he said. Valerie, who had been standing by the window the whole time, suddenly took a sharp breath. She must have put it there herself, she said loudly. I was just packing things, as Jeremy asked. I have no idea what that sachet is. It might have been there for ages. Ramos slowly turned to her. So, you are claiming that you did not place this object in the suitcase? Of course. And before the inspection began, that object was already inside the suitcase? I don't know when it got there. So, you allow for the possibility that it was there before you arrived? Valerie hesitated for a moment, understanding the trap. If she said yes, it meant the drugs were in the suitcase when only she had access to it, as Carla wasn't home. If she said no, it meant she knew it wasn't there before she arrived, which implied she knew how it got there. I don't know, she repeated, but the former confidence was gone. Jeremy mumbled something incomprehensible from the sofa. Ramos looked at him. Do you have something to say? Nothing, Jeremy said, looking at the floor. In that case, I will ask you and Miss Clark to provide sworn statements. Ramos nodded to his partner. Forms. They wrote their statements separately, each in a different corner of the room. Valerie wrote quickly, forcefully, as if angry at the paper. Jeremy was slow, stopping several times, chewing on the end of his pen. Carla gave her statement orally, which the officer recorded. She spoke directly, without drama. What time she came home, what she saw, what her daughter said, what steps she took, what she did not touch. No extra words, no accusations she couldn't prove. Renee also gave a statement. She arrived after her friend called, entered the building with the police, saw the open suitcase, and witnessed that Carla did not touch the suitcase from the moment she arrived at the condo. "We'll take down your details as well," the officer said to Renee, and she calmly dictated the information from her ID, like a person with nothing to hide. By the time all the statements were taken and signed, it was completely dark outside. The streetlights cast a glow into the living room window. Maya had fallen asleep in the chair, her knees drawn up to her chest, and no one dared to wake her. Even Valerie, who had glanced at the child several times with a particular expression seen on people who are beginning to understand that a small, unexpected witness has become a very big problem. Ramos placed the documents in a folder and looked at Valerie. "In connection with the discovery of this evidence, there will be an investigation. The origin of this substance will be determined. I advise all involved not to leave the city and to remain reachable." "What investigation?" Valerie straightened up. "I didn't do anything." "You don't even know what's in that sachet." "Exactly, which is why it will go to the lab," Ramos said, without emotion. "Until the results are back, all angles will be considered." He turned to Carla. "Regarding the presence of an uninvited person in your condo, we will also file a report. I advise you to consult an attorney." "I'm already thinking about it," Carla said. When the police left, taking the sealed envelope and the signed reports, a strange kind of silence remained in the condo. Not tense, but suffocating. Valerie stood in the middle of the living room and looked at Carla as if seeing her for the first time. "Do you really think you did everything right?" she finally said quietly, almost without emotion. "Yes, I did everything right," Carla answered. "This isn't the end." "No, it's not," Carla agreed. "It's not the end. But the beginning is already in my favor." She went to the chair, gently woke Maya, and took her hand. "Let's go, honey," she said to her daughter. "You'll sleep at Auntie Renee's tonight." And they walked out of the living room without looking back. Renee walked beside her, shoulder to shoulder. Behind them, Jeremy remained, not even raising his head, and Valerie, who for the first time that night, had no idea what to do next. The night at Renee's house passed almost without sleep. Maya fell asleep quickly. A child's body takes its rest even when the adult world has collapsed. But Carla sat in her friend's kitchen until 2 a.m., staring at a single point on the checkered tablecloth. Renee didn't probe. She just sat next to her, occasionally refilling her coffee cup, in the way that only people so close can be silent, understanding that right now, words were not needed. Carla spoke on her own, not right away. At first, she stared at the tablecloth for a long time, then quietly said that she thought the scariest thing was finding out about Valerie, that he was cheating on her, that all this time she had been living with someone who didn't even see her. She paused for a moment. It turned out that wasn't it. The scariest thing was that he agreed, that he nodded when that woman offered it. Renee didn't answer, just squeezed her shoulder. The next morning, while Maya was eating pancakes and watching cartoons on a tablet, Carla called a law firm. Renee had given her the number. As an accountant, she often dealt with various professionals and knew good people. The lawyer, Patricia Vance, was free that very day at noon. Patricia had been an attorney for 10 years, specializing in family law and criminal defense. A rare combination, but it was exactly what Carla needed now. 36 years old, with a short haircut, thin-framed glasses, dressed in a no-frills business suit. She listened to Carla carefully, without interrupting, making notes in her legal pad. When Carla finished, Patricia put down her pen. "Your actions were correct," she said, without preamble. The immediate call to the police, the video recording before the inspection, and having a witness to confirm you didn't touch the suitcase. This is a strong position. But Maya is the only one who saw Valerie place the sachet. That's not a weakness, Patricia said. It's a separate matter that needs to be handled correctly. A child's testimony in such cases is a delicate thing. Carla understood this intuitively. Patricia explained the legal side. Maya couldn't be interrogated like an adult witness. The process was different, more careful, involving a social worker or a forensic interviewer. But the fact that Maya reported the planting to her mother and reported it before anyone could explain to her what was happening was already noted in the police blotter and report, and that was what mattered. A 9-year-old child cannot know what a transparent sachet with white powder specifically means, Patricia said. She described what she saw. The auntie took the sachet and hid it under the clothes, and she quoted the words she heard. This is not her interpretation. It's an observation, and that's how we will frame it. They agreed. Patricia would take the case. 2 tracks, family law and criminal. In family law, legal separation, child support, and custody, establishing Maya's residence with her mother. In criminal, protecting Carla from any possible attempt to shift responsibility for the found drugs onto her, and simultaneously gathering evidence against Valerie. Until the lab results are ready, we wait, Patricia said. But starting today, we build our line of defense. The next day, Friday, Attorney Vance contacted the investigator handling the case materials regarding the discovery of the illegal drugs. The investigator was a woman in her 40s. Carla was not present for their conversation, but Patricia informed her of everything that evening, briefly and to the point. They want to talk to Maya. An informal conversation with a psychologist and a social worker. It's not an interrogation, just a conversation. I insisted on my presence. It's scheduled for Monday. Carla nodded. She was ready. She's more ready than many adults I've seen sit in that chair, Patricia said. And in her voice, for the first time in their conversation, something like warm admiration appeared. On Sunday evening, Carla talked to her daughter. She didn't coach her on answers. She didn't explain what she should say. She just sat beside her on the bed. And as Maya was flipping through a book, the child suddenly asked, "Mom, tomorrow, do I have to tell them about what I saw?" "Yes, just what you saw. You don't have to make anything up." "Okay, just what happened." Maya nodded and closed the book. "I remember it all," she said. "I'm not making it up." "I know," Carla said. Monday morning. The conversation with Maya took place in a room that psychologists call a soft room. Soft chairs, neutral colors, no desks with folders, and glaring official lights. The specialist, a young woman with a gentle voice, spoke to the child as if they were just chatting, without any protocol stiffness. Patricia sat quietly in a corner. Carla waited outside. The conversation lasted about 40 minutes. When Maya came out, the first thing she asked was if she could get a juice from the vending machine near the elevator. Carla gave her some change and watched her daughter walk down the corridor, her back straight, her walk calm, and thought that she had grown into a very resilient child. She didn't know where such resilience came from. Perhaps that's what happens when, from a young age, a child learns to understand things that adults prefer not to notice. Patricia came out next and said quietly that Maya described everything sequentially, with no contradictions. That the child saw what was done, described the object, and repeated the words she heard at the time of the incident. The key was that she didn't know and couldn't possibly understand the meaning of what was happening. She just described the facts. That works in our favor. Meanwhile, Jeremy, who had been left in the condo with Valerie, was beginning to understand that the situation had gone far beyond what he had imagined. He had expected a simple scenario. Carla would get scared and leave. The condo issue would be resolved quietly, without a scandal. Valerie had convinced him it was the best way for everyone, quick and without courts. He had believed her. He always believed people who spoke with confidence. It was his greatest weakness, more destructive than his cowardice. But now there were police, a blotter, a sealed envelope with a sachet, a laboratory, and a lawyer he hadn't yet met but already feared. And most importantly, his 9-year-old daughter was sitting in front of an investigator, recounting exactly what she had seen. He called Carla on Tuesday morning. She answered the call. "Carla," he began, and his voice was that of a man trying to sound calm but crumbling inside. "We need to talk. No lawyers. All our conversations will go through my lawyer," Carla said. "Carla, wait. I just want to say—" He paused for a few seconds. "This has gone too far. I didn't think it would be like this." "What part didn't you think would happen?" she asked directly. "That the police would be called, or that Maya would see it." He didn't answer. "Jeremy," Carla said, and in her voice, there was no anger, only fatigue, and the strange clarity that comes when a person has already made a decision and no longer needs proof. "You could have stopped her at any moment before she put that sachet in there. You could have said no. You didn't." She hung up. Valerie, at that time, was building her own line of defense. She was sure the child was young, the testimony unstable. A lawyer could prove the child either misremembered or invented it. The witness, Carla's friend, was a biased party. The video only recorded the general situation, not the specific act of planting. It meant there was no direct evidence. It meant she could win. But there was one thing Valerie didn't account for. She was the type of person whose thoughts moved quickly, but whose words moved even faster. And in the past few days, she had said too much, more than once. On Friday night, after the police had left, she texted Carla. A short message sent, it seemed, in a moment when anger overcame calculation. "You think you're so smart. I told you you'd be leaving." "That means you're leaving. That sachet is just the beginning." Carla read the message, took a screenshot with the time, date, and sender's name, and forwarded it to Patricia. Patricia called back within 5 minutes. "This is crucial." She wrote sachet. That means she knew exactly what object was in question. And in her version, she had no idea what it was or where it came from. "This is a direct contradiction. We will file this." "I already have," Carla said. "Good. Don't reply to any more of her messages. Let her write. Every word will work against her." Simultaneously, the story with Jeremy was unfolding. He gave his statement to the investigator on Thursday, and based on what was later learned, his explanations showed no consistency or conviction. First, he insisted that Valerie was just helping him pack and didn't touch the suitcase without his knowledge. Then, when reminded that his own words didn't align with this, he corrected himself, saying he didn't watch her every move. Then he added that it was possible she had put something in, but he didn't think it was serious. The investigator recorded all 3 versions. 3 versions from one person about a single event. This wasn't confusion. It was a lie, in the process of unraveling. Valerie learned about this on Friday night. Jeremy himself told her, probably hoping for her support. Instead of support, she exploded. The neighbors on the other side of the wall heard the screaming. This later came to light because the neighbor from the 3rd floor, the same man who had witnessed the suitcase inspection, mentioned it in a casual conversation with their precinct's community officer. The officer made a note. By the end of the first week since that September evening, the picture began to form, and it was not in Valerie's favor. Her version, "I know nothing, I was just folding clothes," was crumbling from all sides. The contradictions in Jeremy's testimony, her own text message mentioning the sachet, Maya's consistent story recorded by a professional, Carla's immediate action of not touching the suitcase, and following legal procedure from the first minute. Valerie had set a trap, and it had sprung, but not where she expected. Carla learned the results of the first week from Patricia on Saturday morning. The lawyer called and recounted it briefly, without extra frills. The lab results came back earlier than expected. It's a confirmed illegal substance. The investigation is moving to the next stage. Cruz's status is changing. "What does that mean?" Carla asked. "It means she's no longer just a witness in a dispute. Now they'll be asking her different questions." Carla hung up the phone. In the other room at Renee's house, Maya was drawing. The scratching of a pencil on paper could be heard. Outside the window, the late September sun was shining, yellow and a little sad, like the last warmth before a heavy downpour. In the coming storm, Carla thought of Valerie, not with anger. The anger had burned out that night while she sat in front of her cold coffee. All that remained was a clear, almost calm understanding. That woman had relied so much on the weakness of others that she was completely unprepared for her opponent's strength, and Carla had proven to be stronger than Valerie. The trap had been sprung. The second week began with Valerie calling Jeremy on Sunday morning and talking to him for 40 minutes. Jeremy later couldn't remember exactly what she said. That's what happens when you listen to someone who is simultaneously persuading, threatening, and commanding. All three things spoken in the same tone without a break. The only thing he remembered was the general idea. Stick to the version, don't change the testimony. Tell the investigator the sachet had been there for a long time. Valerie hadn't touched it. Maya was just a kid and probably made a mistake. If he gave up now, she would never forgive him. Jeremy just listened and stayed silent. That was his nature too. To be silent when he needed to speak. And to speak when he needed to be silent. After the call, he sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring out the window. Outside, the neighborhood was alive with noise. Kids were playing basketball in the street. A neighbor's dog was barking at them. A car drove by. An ordinary life that didn't know he was sitting there, trying to decide whose side to take. Not out of conscience. He had struggled with that long before this incident, but out of fear. He was afraid of Valerie. He was afraid of the investigator and of the lawyer, Patricia Vance, whom he had glimpsed in the hallway of the law firm and who had looked at him as if she already knew everything about him, including things he hadn't yet admitted to himself. And most of all, he was afraid to look into Maya's eyes. Not because the child would do or say anything bad. She had already said what she saw, and that couldn't be changed. He was afraid of her gaze, the gaze she had given him on the night the police came. No tears, no shouts. She had just looked at him the way you look at a stranger you've seen for the first time and aren't sure if you can trust. That look hadn't left his mind, day or night. On Monday, Valerie arrived at the investigator's office for a second conversation. This time, she was with a lawyer she had hired over the weekend. This lawyer was one of those who take any case if you pay up front, and he based his defense on the only material he had, doubt. The child's testimony was unreliable due to her age. The witness, the complainant's friend, was a biased party. The video recording only captured the general situation, not the specific act of planting. The drugs could have ended up in the suitcase in any number of ways, including being Carla's own. The investigator listened, nodded, wrote, and then laid a printout of the text message exchange on the table. Valerie's message to Carla, sent on Friday night, a few hours after the police left. You think you're so smart. I told you you'd be leaving. That means you're leaving. That sachet is just the beginning. Valerie's lawyer read it and fell silent. This can be interpreted in different ways, he said cautiously. The word sachet, the investigator said calmly, is used in the same context as it appears in the case documents. Your client claimed in her statement that she knew nothing about the sachet and didn't understand what it was. This message contradicts her given testimony. Valerie sat up straight, her facial expression unreadable, but her fingers were placed too evenly on her knees. That's how people hold their hands when they're trying to hide their nerves. I meant something else, she said. I heard about the sachet from Jeremy. He told me after the police left. So you learned about the sachet from your partner, the investigator clarified, and not from your own observation. Yes. Then please clarify what exactly Mr. Martinez told you. A silence. Too long for someone who was just repeating what they had heard. That the police found a sachet in the suitcase. Did he call it a sachet specifically? Yes, something like that. In the report filed by Sergeant Ramos, the evidence is listed as a plastic packet. Different words. Where did the specific word sachet in your message come from? Valerie opened her mouth and closed it again. Her lawyer placed a hand on her arm, a silent signal. Be quiet. We will consider this question and provide a written response, the lawyer said. The investigator nodded and made a note. After the conversation, Valerie went out into the hallway, and the first thing she did was call Jeremy. Carla learned about this later, from Jeremy himself, when he finally made a decision that cost him a lot, but possibly saved him from even greater trouble. On Wednesday, in the third week since that September night, Jeremy Martinez went to the investigator without an appointment, without a lawyer, alone. He sat in the chair opposite him, placed his hands on the table, and said he wanted to change his previous statements. The investigator turned on the recorder, warned him of the responsibility for giving false testimony, for perjury. Jeremy nodded at every point, like a man who had already made his decision and was now just following the procedure. Valerie Cruz brought the sachet, he said. I saw it in her bag before we even entered the condo. She said it was for insurance, in case Carla was stubborn. She would either get scared and leave without a fuss, or if it wasn't found now, it would be found later when needed. He paused. I asked her, what if this is a serious crime? She said it wasn't my problem. The important thing was that we would get the condo. I agreed. I shouldn't have. The investigator wrote, unhurriedly, without comment. Why are you changing your statement now? He asked when Jeremy fell silent. Jeremy looked away, then turned his head back to the investigator and said that it was because his daughter sat there and told them what she saw, and he, all this time, had been trying to make what she said worthless. He took a deep breath. He couldn't live like this. It was probably the only honest sentence he had spoken in weeks. Patricia learned of Jeremy's new statement that same evening. The investigator informed her as the complainant's lawyer. She immediately called Carla. He gave a statement against Valerie. He confirmed that the drugs were intentionally brought as a setup and that he knew about it beforehand. Carla was silent for a few seconds. Does he understand what this means for him? Yes. He will be considered a person with knowledge of an impending crime. He won't escape liability either, but his testimony is a major breakthrough in the case against Valerie. Good, Carla said, and nothing more. She didn't feel triumph. She didn't feel relief. Instead, at that moment, there was a different feeling, hard to explain. A feeling that the large, heavy vehicle that had been speeding towards her had started to brake. It hadn't stopped yet, but it was braking. Valerie learned of Jeremy's statement on Thursday. What happened next was what Carla would later call a moment when a person loses the last thing that keeps them sane. Valerie called Carla. Not a text. A real call. 8:30 inches the evening. Carla didn't answer immediately, giving herself time to start recording it. Listen to me carefully, Valerie said, her voice even. But underneath that evenness, there was a hum, like a high-voltage power line. You think you've won. You've won nothing. Jeremy caved because he's a coward, but that doesn't change what I know about you. What do you know about me? Carla asked calmly. I know you have nothing but that condo and your job at the salon. I know you're clinging to Jeremy because you're afraid to be alone. And I know you thought no one would find the sachet in time. You thought you could get away quietly, and no one would prove anything. Quietly? No, Carla said. You were the one who thought no one would find the sachet in time, not me. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. You've said enough for now, Carla added. Good night. She hung up and immediately sent the recording to Patricia with a short message. She called, attached. Patricia replied within 3 minutes. Perfect. She did our job for us. In that call, Valerie uttered a sentence that, combined with the texts and Jeremy's statement, painted a very clear picture. She knew about the sachet. She knew about it in advance, and she was sure it wouldn't be found in time, meaning she was counting on a different discovery scenario than the one that occurred. For the investigator, this wasn't just a slip of the tongue. It was another brick in the wall of evidence. On Friday morning, Valerie was summoned again. This time, the conversation was stricter and shorter, and it ended in a way she did not expect. She was officially designated as a suspect. Her lawyer was saying something about procedure and rights. She nodded, but her face looked as if the ground was collapsing under her feet, and she had nothing to hold on to. She was not arrested. The case proceedings at this stage did not yet require arrest, but her phone was confiscated for analysis of messages, and she was ordered not to leave the city. Carla learned this from Patricia that same day around noon. Her status is suspect for possession and transport of illegal drugs, Patricia said succinctly. This isn't the end, but it's a major turn. The case is heading in the direction it should. Carla was sitting in a coffee shop near the salon. She had gone back to work 3 days ago because life doesn't stop. Clients were scheduled, and she needed to earn money. Whatever was happening at home, her colleagues didn't ask. She didn't tell, and if anyone did ask, she answered briefly, family problems. That was enough. She drank her coffee and looked out the window. A woman with a stroller was walking down the street. 2 students were riding bikes. On the corner, a woman was selling flowers. September was ending. The air had become cooler, but the sun was still warm, and the trees along the road were still green. Carla thought that her life looked something like this now. Not yet new, but changing. Not yet completely free from the past, but no longer clinging to it. She paid for her coffee, left the shop, and walked back to the salon. In half an hour, her next client was due for a manicure. Talk about things that didn't matter so much. In the evening, she would pick up Maya from Renee's and bring her home to the condo, where Valerie would never enter again. She had changed the locks as soon as she moved back in. It was her first decision made not out of fear, but because it was the right thing to do. Because the condo was hers. Because Maya needed a home. Because a new life doesn't begin with sweet words, but with concrete actions. Changing the locks, calling a lawyer, going back to work, and hot coffee in the evening instead of cold. That Saturday evening, she and Maya were sitting in the kitchen of their own condo, her own kitchen, with new keys hanging by the door. Maya was drawing with colored pencils. A pot of soup was simmering on the stove. It smelled like home. "Mom," Maya said without looking up from her drawing. "Is Dad not coming home anymore?" Carla was silent for a moment, then answered, "That depends on a lot of things. But you will see him. When everything is settled." Maya nodded and picked up a different pencil. "Okay," she said, and continued drawing. Carla looked at her daughter and thought that this, right here, the soup on the stove, the pencils, the nod instead of tears, was proof that her decision not to give up that night had not been in vain. The night when Valerie stood over the open suitcase, absolutely convinced she had already won. Valerie had miscalculated. Not in the small details, but in something more important, in people. October arrived quickly. The temperature changed overnight. The sky became overcast, and the air smelled of rain. In the morning, it seemed like it might still be warm, but by noon, a downpour would start. In the mornings, Maya wore a raincoat, and as Carla buttoned it up, she would think, "The rainy season is here." She filed the papers for legal separation in the first week of October. Attorney Vance prepared the documents quickly and clearly. No extra chatter, no display of excessive emotion, with the professionalism that is valued more in times of crisis than any sympathy. Along with the petition for separation was a request to determine Maya's residence with her mother and a petition for child support. 3 directions, each precise and well-founded in law. Jeremy did not object, not because he had become a better person, but because he understood he was cornered. His testimony against Valerie had also become a verdict against himself. In family court, a person who knew about a setup being prepared against his own wife and did nothing to stop it had no right to insist on his role as a responsible parent. Patricia used this argument precisely and without excessive intimidation. She simply laid out the facts, which spoke for themselves. The first hearing in the case took place in mid-October. Carla sat at one table, next to Patricia, looking straight ahead. At the other table was Jeremy, with a different lawyer he had hastily hired. They did not look at each other. 10 years of marriage, and now 2 tables, 2 lawyers, and a judge between them. The judge was a woman with a sharp gaze and a habit of asking short questions, but in a way that you couldn't evade answering. She had studied the case materials in advance. You could feel it in how she framed the questions, no longer asking for clarification on details she already knew. "Mr. Martinez," she said, looking at Jeremy, "do you have any objection to determining the child's residence with her mother?" "No, Your Honor," he answered quietly. "Regarding the obligation of child support, I am prepared to pay." Jeremy's lawyer whispered something to him for a moment, but he shook his head. It seemed he already knew it was pointless to bargain. The hearing lasted less than 2 hours. For family court, that was very fast. Patricia later explained that when the other party does not object and the evidence on key aspects has been collected, there is nothing to drag out. The decision on Maya's custody was granted in favor of the mother. For child support, 25% of Jeremy's monthly income, with a set minimum amount in case his income became unstable. The legal separation was finalized at that hearing, by agreement, without further hearings. Carla walked out of the courtroom at 1:30 p.m. Patricia walked beside her. "Is it over?" Carla asked. "The family part, yes. The criminal part is ongoing." The criminal case against Valerie Clark proceeded according to due process. More serious, longer, with more legal steps. The lab had long since confirmed that the fingerprints on the sachet were Valerie's. The contents were a controlled substance, illegal under the law. Its distribution and possession were criminal offenses. The origin of the drugs was being investigated separately. The investigator worked in this direction, gathering data, studying messages from Valerie's confiscated phone. What was found on the phone became perhaps the most unexpected twist in this whole story. Among the conversations, messages were found sent 2 weeks before that September night. Valerie was communicating with a contact saved as Uncle. The content of the conversation was described by the investigator in the documents directly and professionally, but its meaning was clear. Valerie was asking how it was done and what would happen if it were discovered. Uncle was answering. This meant that Valerie's act of putting the sachet in the suitcase was not spontaneous. She had planned it, thought it through, consulted. This changed the classification from a spontaneous incident to a more serious, premeditated crime. Valerie's lawyer tried to build a defense that his client did not understand the consequences of her actions, that she was driven by overwhelming emotion. The investigator attached the text message exchange to the case. After that, it became very difficult to argue that it was due to emotion. In early November, the first hearing in the criminal case took place. Patricia attended as the victim's representative. Carla was recognized as the victim of a planned evidence planting. Valerie sat in the defendant's chair with her lawyer, her back straight and her face blank, in the same pose as that night in the living room. But her eyes had changed, unsettled, darting around. The charges included possession and transport of illegal drugs with the intent to harm another, using it as an instrument of coercion. Jeremy, in the criminal case, was treated as a person with knowledge of a crime who took no action to prevent it. His testimony played a crucial role against Valerie, but it also put him in a very precarious position. The final punishment for him would be decided in a separate ruling, but he was certain to face charges. During the preliminary hearings, Carla hardly spoke. Patricia led everything, clearly, without excess chatter. Carla just sat, listened, and thought about the strange feeling that never left her, not joy, not relief, in the usual sense. It was like coming out of a dark room and being blinded by daylight. You don't immediately understand what has happened. You just squint and breathe. After the hearing, outside, Patricia said that the case was strong. The chances of a conviction were high. The exact sentence and years would be the judge's decision, but the direction was clear. "How much longer?" Carla asked. "A few more months." Criminal cases are not as fast as family cases. But you have nothing to worry about anymore. Your position is secure. Carla nodded, zipped up her jacket, it was cool outside, and walked towards the bus stop. As she walked, Maya called. The child was at her friend Renee's house, after school, waiting for her mother. "I'm on my way," Carla said. "Did you eat?" Auntie Renee made pancakes. "Okay, good. Wait for me." Life went on. It was almost surprising that despite everything that had happened in the past month and a half, it just kept happening. Pancakes at Renee's, work at the salon, queuing at the grocery store, the alarm clock ringing in the morning. But perhaps that was the main proof that she had coped. Not as a hero, not like in a movie. She just coped. In mid-November, Carla changed her schedule at the salon. She took on an extra day of work and asked for a higher hourly rate. She needed the money for the mortgage, for Maya, for daily expenses. The child support from Jeremy arrived at the end of October, right on time. She didn't know what prompted him to pay on time: shame, fear of the law, or something else. She didn't think about it. She just saw the money come in and paid the water and electricity bills. Renee Reyes, by that time, was visiting their house almost weekly. Not out of pity, but because Maya had gotten used to her, and it was nice to eat as a threesome. Renee would bring donuts or pastries to have with coffee. They would sit in the kitchen after Maya was asleep and talk, not always about serious things, often about work, funny incidents, and so on. In that way, life returned to normal. Not through grand decisions, but through ordinary evenings when you could talk about anything. Once, at the end of November, Maya brought a drawing to Carla. "For you," she said. On the paper was a house, drawn by a child. A square, with a triangular roof, a window with curtains. Next to the house stood two figures, one large, one small, with black and brown hair. Maya had diligently colored the large figure's hair with a brown pencil. At the bottom was written in large letters, "We are home." Carla took the paper, looked at it, then at her daughter. Maya nodded with a serious expression, like a person who has completed a very important task, and went to her room. Carla taped the drawing to the wall next to Maya's activity schedule, in the place where all the everyday necessities were kept. The criminal proceedings against Valerie Cruz concluded in February of the following year. Carla sat in the courtroom, next to Patricia. The room was small, formal, with high windows and an American flag in the corner. Valerie sat in the defendant's chair, wearing a dark blazer, next to her lawyer. Throughout the reading of the verdict, she never once looked in Carla's direction. The judge read the verdict in an even voice, without emotion. That's how people read documents they deal with every day, having long since ceased to invest any personal feeling into them. Carla listened and heard every word, but she detached it from herself, as if reading someone else's story, and she just happened to be there. The decision was guilty. Valerie Clark was sentenced to 3 to 5 years in the State Correctional Facility for Women. Considering the circumstances, premeditation, proven by the text messages, and the use of a controlled substance to intentionally ruin another person's life, the court saw no reason to grant her probation or a suspended sentence. It was quiet in the courtroom. Valerie's lawyer wrote something down. Valerie didn't move, but her shoulders slumped slightly, almost imperceptibly, like a person who has been fighting for a long time and has finally given up. Patricia leaned over to Carla and whispered that it was over. The verdict would take effect after an appeal, if there was one, but the judge's decision was on their side. Carla nodded. She stood up, zipped up her jacket, and walked out of the courtroom. The hallway was cool. She stopped by a window and looked outside. A street full of cars, the blue February sky, trees along the road, people walking by, indifferent to what had just been read in the room she had just left. Patricia came out after her. "How are you?" she asked. "I'm okay," Carla answered. And it was true. Not bravery, not a facade. A simple fact. They walked out of the courthouse together. Outside, Patricia shook her hand, a quick, firm handshake. The kind you give someone who has made it to the end and hasn't given up on the journey. Jeremy, by that time, was renting a one-bedroom apartment in another part of the city. He saw Maya once every 2 weeks, according to the agreement. Their meetings were neutral. He would pick her up for a few hours, they would go for a walk, and then he would bring her home. Maya didn't talk in detail about their outings, and Carla didn't ask. This was also part of the new life, not getting involved where it wasn't necessary. That summer, Maya enrolled in a drawing class. She had signed up on her own initiative after her teacher praised her drawing in class. Carla enrolled her. Every Saturday, they would take the L train to the other side of the city, and Maya would look out the window with a serious, deep attention, the way people look when they are thinking about something very important. Once, on the L train, Maya asked her mother if she regretted anything. Carla thought about it. She really thought about it, not answering right away. "No," she said. "I only regret the time we wasted. But that's over now." Maya looked out the window again. The city flew by beyond the glass houses, tall trees, people at the stations. "Okay," the child said. "I don't regret it either." The drawing, "We Are Home," still hung on the wall. It had faded a little around the edges, but Carla didn't take it down. Not because she forgot, but because every time she passed it, she saw it and thought that this was the most important thing. Not the victory over Valerie, not the court's verdict, not the signed separation papers. A person is not destroyed by events, but by the decision to give up. Carla hadn't made that decision, and Maya would never forget it.